My next topic, villains. Now, this is my favorite segment. Understand that villains are optional. Like I said, Man vs. Man and Man vs. Nature are some of the best stories written, but villains, everybody loves a good villain. The second thing to understand is that villains are not for you, nor are they for your audience, nor are they for the readers. They are for your main character, and what they do is that they have to make your character grow in some way. And third of all, understand that they don't have to be bad. Some of the best villains are characters who don't even realize that they're bad, that they're actually believe that they're doing something good for the good of the world. Now, in most stories, there are normally three types of villains. There's the good villains, the bad villains, and the ones that want to watch the world burn, or the ugly. So, first, the good villains. You have to understand these villains, because these are the guys that think that everything they're doing is for a good cause. Or in this case, everything that they're doing is going for an evil cause, but that's just how he's been raised. You relate to these villains because you could see yourself being in the shoes of this person, and you're able to get inside their minds. Normally, this is one of the stories where you will be inside their mind. You will find out that they have strong beliefs in certain points, hence why they are the villain and opposing the main character. And lastly, lots of these guys do generate sympathy because you can easily see yourself or somebody else that you know stepping into their shoes and being this, and to have them face against the main character who will probably win, that's a tough job to fill. Now there's the bad. These guys, you have to understand their motives, but you don't have to totally see inside their head, because their motives are normally something kind of relatable. They want to take over the world, they want to kill the main character. You may or may not relate to these guys, because these guys are defined by a single moment. This moment can be a tragedy in their past. It could be something as big as their parents getting killed, or it could be something as small as one day when they were going to the bus stop, some little kid pushed them over. Now, they are defined by a single moment, and this moment is also a tipping point for the villains, and this characterizes them as tipping from good to bad. Now, these characters may generate sympathy from the readers, because you may have also been pushed over when going to the bus stop at age 6. And these guys mainly know they are bad, but they don't embrace it in whole. They think that they are bad, but they are doing it for themselves, and therefore it is, quote, good. Now there's the ugly. These guys are random in ideas, they're random in form. What they do is normally unpredictable. Normally these guys have issues. You'll find them in thrillers, mysteries, sci-fi. Normally they have no sympathy, but why? That's because they're unrelatable. You do not get inside these guys' heads because it is a crazy place in there. For example, you don't feel much sympathy for the Joker in The Dark Knight. Normally they destroy something, whether that's a building, a landmark, or the thing that's most important to the hero. They will destroy it and force the hero to grow more than any other villain. And when I say force the hero to rise, I mean he's definitely got to rise to the occasion. He's got to go from one spot to the next. Now, normally these guys are the hardest to write out of everybody, because they walk a line that's even thinner than most villains. Because if you put them too out there, then people don't believe them. But if you don't make them crazy enough, then they fall into the category of bad villains, or just simply a really bad villain, and not as in the type of bad villain as I showed in the previous slide, but the bad villain in which you put the book down. So these guys definitely are hardest to write. I would not encourage having these guys in it until maybe the second or third book in a series, or maybe the first book in a thriller or a mystery, because you've got to know the main character a little bit before you put these guys in, because these guys will steal the show if you get them right. So now I would like to all have you guys outline some sort of villain. And do it the same way as your hero. ideas or not, it's good. Try to make the ideas for your hero and your villain fit together. If your idea does not have a villain, expand more on your idea and your plot and what he would face. You guys must never underestimate the power of a villain who is simply unremarkable, because it's sometimes those guys who are the greatest. For example, a lawyer that's going against another hero that has no scars, no nothing. He just has an agenda to go out and beat this guy in court. That's a good character. That's a good villain as well. And those are the villains of, while lots of people relate to many of the ugly types of villains, and they're great, those villains should also never be underestimated because they're sometimes the most real out of all of them. Alright, now I hate to do this to you guys, make you write in 2 sessions without much talk between them, but I'm going to try an experiment with you guys. Now this experiment should work in theory, and this is my first time trying it out with a class, so let's take a few minutes to write something boring, okay? And when I say write something boring, I don't mean the dog went out to the car. Not in like simple sentences like that. Actually write like a paragraph or 2 of something that's boring, can be related to the plot of your story or not, and then take another couple of minutes to try and write something that's exciting. It can be however long as you want, how long you want, both of them, and we'll see where that comes out to. Most of you will see on your papers is that your boring writing will go something a little like this, and I use paint drying as well. The drop of paint slid slowly down the wall. The light from the window shone in, making the red a scarlet crimson hue, the same shade as blood. It'll go something like that, describing like paint drying or an ordinary day. And now, the second thing, your exciting thing, will go something like this. The shock cracked out of the gun and the race was on. Sprinters hurtled themselves onto the course and began to dash around the ring. Now, what do you guys notice about those two? What is it about the style of writing between those two? Which one of those makes you more intrigued? The one about drying paint or the one about sprinters? Because sprinters, it allows you to get in to their minds and see them on the track, and it gets this fast-paced motion going. But in a reader's mind, the intriguing bit will be the drop of paint drying. Because with the drop of paint drying, you could say, why is it drying? Why are they those colors? Why did they choose to paint on this day? If there's obviously a sunny day, they must have been doing the sun, because the paint could dry that way. But is it the outside of the house? Is it the inside of the house? So many questions can be raised by that, and sometimes those are the most intriguing points to the whole thing. Whereas the sprinters, it's very straightforward, it's very clear. So both of them are good ways to write. However, when you're using suspense, sometimes the boring things are more suspenseful than the real things. Next slide. So I'll talk about suspense now. Now, suspense is a very difficult thing to master. Many will try, few will succeed at first. And for those that can't read that, it says, suspense, sometimes you don't want it to end. So, first of all, you've got to make the stakes known to your character. You've got to make sure that they know what is being risked here, why they are going on this vision, why they're going on this quest. And therefore, they have to react to it accordingly. Their lines have to be believable, their thoughts have to be believable, their actions have to be believable. And now suspense can be used to a point. Suspense can be used in endings a lot, and it sometimes annoys me as a reader, because books like The Hunger Games, where they leave every chapter off at a cliffhanger, okay, I'm good with that, but there's some other books, like have any of you read Incarceron? Yeah. Where they leave it off every single time the narrator changes perspective, and that just annoys the heck out of me. I mean, if you end and start the same way every single time, readers are going to get bored of it. And if you use suspense too frequently, then the readers get bored of it. If you don't use it enough, then the readers will put the book down. So where's the fine line between that? How do you infuse suspense in your words? Now, a great deal of suspense can be used with showing versus telling. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of this, and I had heard of this as well many, many years ago from a writing teacher. But I never really got showing versus telling until a couple of months ago, or less than a month ago actually, when I was at Comic-Con. I was attending a writing seminar from a man named Alexander Maxwell Drake, and he really opened my eyes to the difference between showing versus telling. So this whole slide is probably going to be paraphrased from his presentation about it. So what's the difference between showing versus telling? Well, Drake had a very good observation that he made. Showing is when the readers can see the picture. Telling is when the readers can't see the picture. And now the easy way to remember that is showing's like when in a movie a guy's son gets hit by a bus or something, and the man runs over to him and you can see him cradling him in his arms and crying and stuff. Telling is more like Animal Planet or stuff, when you have that narrator in the background with the Australian accent going, okay, the crocodile is now approaching the watering hole. The buffalo may not survive. That's the difference between showing and telling. You have to see that guy. So if you're going to have an emotional scene in a book where a guy's cradling his son, you don't want the Australian man standing over him and going, and now he's cradling his son. Oh my. So you have to use that as perspective, and that really makes it clearer. Another thing with showing versus telling is never use lead or never use adverbs. The big thing about that is you can say something like cautiously, hurriedly, and those are fine ordinarily, but if you say hurriedly he dashed to his son, you can't dash without hurrying. So what's the use of putting in that extra word? You don't get the bang for your buck. In essence, I mean, some of professional writers have word counts to do, so putting in adverbs like that will limit their word count, and they can easily cut down on them, and they just don't need to be there because they take you away from the scene, and they bring you out into reality because you say, hurriedly? Yeah, he dashed. I'm sure he dashed hurriedly. It's no use. And so another thing is, when to use it. You do not want to use showing every single time in a story. You want to use it when you get the bang for your buck. Showing you can use when it's emotional, when you need suspense, all that. However, telling is important too, because if, for instance, your character's just had this quest and he goes home and he's going to tell his brothers and sisters what he did, you don't want to describe the whole thing over and say, oh, and then my blood froze to ice as I saw the monster. No, you just said, and then he told the tale. That's fine, because the reader doesn't need to know that. They've already seen everything that's happened in it. Another thing about showing versus telling and suspense is using verbs, and now using good choice of verbs. So words like he hit the wall. Okay, that's not great. I can see a guy clearly hitting a wall. But then you can up your choice of words. So you go smacked against the wall. All right, better vocabulary. He face planted against the wall. Well, now I can see that. And then he collided with the wall last of all. And that one's a much better choice of vocabulary, in my opinion, than anything else. It just shows a lot more sophistication, and it makes you know that this guy is really getting hurt rather than he hit the wall. But one thing you have to do when you use those is you have to watch out for words that people don't know, because that pulls people out of the story more than anything else. Even words that you think you know from honors English class, some of those words people don't know in 9th grade. So even though you think that your readers do know the words, try to dumb it down a little bit, even though you may not want to. Don't go to hit, but go to collide, instead of something insane and out there. So Another thing is that you have to keep your readers guessing. You have to give them enough information for them to be interested in your story. You've got to let them see the light at the end of the tunnel. But how do you do that without giving your readers too much? Well, you've got to test the waters most of all. This is the most important part of writing, because you go, and this is your first essentially chance for you to show your work to other people. And showing it to other people will give you that opinion of what's happening and everything like that. And in my experience, you do not want to give this work to people that you're going to have to explain it to, or that you have the opportunity to explain it to every day. With the guessing and people reading your work, you want to give it to somebody who's going to take it for 2 weeks, be totally out of contact with you, and then respond at the very end and say, okay, I didn't understand this at this time. Or if you do want people to respond to you almost immediately, you can have them write their thoughts down as they go by. So testing the waters, always very important for having readers. So mistake number 3 is to not break your rules. All worlds in fantasy and science fiction and even nonfiction have rules. For instance, if a magician can only use magic at, I don't know, full moon or so, you can say, and you have your magician use magic in full daylight, then that's going to confuse your readers. Now, you could go and say afterwards that the magician was really lying to the main character when he said he could only use magic at full moon, but if you don't explain it, then readers are going to kill you for it. This is the single biggest mistake that you can make as a writer, because fans tear you apart for incontinuities, especially of big things, like that.